Hi yoga teachers, it's Aneta Itchak here with another training. And today I'd like to talk to you about a question that I get asked a lot. And that question is, how do you incorporate trauma-informed approach into your yoga teaching? It's a huge subject, and the best way to do that is to attend CPD trainings that will take you quite in depth. For the purpose of today's training, I'm going to be talking about 3 different things, just to make it really accessible. Number 1 of how you can incorporate yoga into your teaching straight away is to really start with understanding how trauma and trauma symptoms present, how somebody presents with nervous system dysregulation. How does it show in practical terms? Because it's all good and well to read books, it's all good and well to understand theory, but if you don't know, how it presents on a physiological level, how somebody is presenting in front of you, then it's very difficult then to do something with it. And so it really starts with your understanding from a very physiological level. So on a very simple level, you need to learn the skills to be able to observe not just those big signs when somebody gets triggered and has got very extreme response or reaction, but to start observing those smaller signs. Because one of the things that I know for sure is if you work with people, you work with trauma. Many of us have experienced trauma. Everybody knows what a stress feels like in their body, and it feels differently for different people. But when you come on a physiological response level, you can really start mapping out of how somebody might be presenting, what might be going on for them. And when you learn to observe, you have the skills and you learn to observe those smaller signs with compassion and without judgment, then you really get a full picture, or quite a full picture of what's happening to somebody in the moment. And this is why, when we talk about trauma-informed approach and we talk about embodied resilience, and we start really understanding that it's not just through top-down approaches, not just looking at, from therapeutic point of view, what happened, the story of what happened, but actually looking from bottom-up approaches through physiology of somebody and how they present in the moment. That's when we as yoga teachers can support our students effectively. So what do I mean by that? I mean by that you learn to really notice and observe, as I said, with compassion and without judgment. For example, how somebody is holding themselves in their posture. And you start developing those skills to notice, when they slumped or they upright. How are their shoulders? Are they rounded or they back? Open chest in your face. Are they rigid and stiff or are they soft and floppy? Are they able to close their eyes? Are they able to lie down and relax, or are they not able to lie down? Or if they lie down, they still really rigid and stiff, or they still, go into that freeze response, or they start darting around. They cannot close their eyes. You start noticing what their posture and their body says about the state that they are in this moment. You also start noticing the tension. Where do they hold tension? Is it around the shoulders and the jaw? Is it around the eyes? Is it in the chest, or is it in their belly? Like, I've worked with people who cannot relax their belly. It's this, huge tension held in their body, that protective tension. Are they having, holding their neck in a certain kind of way? You start paying attention, if you're teaching them movement or yoga postures, you start noticing how they're holding. I mean, I've been working with people in the past where they just so tight and so tense. They cannot do certain postures because of that. If you can start paying attention to people's facial expressions about their eyes, are they able to relax their face? Or are they tensing up? Is their presentation quite teary? They got tears in their eyes at some point. Are they quick flashes of emotions going through their face? Are they blinking a lot? So we're talking about what I'm doing now is just going deeper into more of a detailed observation of somebody's presentation. And their movements and gestures, are they jerky, quite rigid, quite, manic almost, or frantic, agitated? Are they expressive? Two people using their hands, one might be quite jerky and quite rigid, the other might be quite expressive. One of the other things is the self-soothing thing. You can sometimes see people touching their hands. You see that quite a lot with people who are quite lonely and they need self-soothing. I kind of start doing that. I've seen that a lot with younger people and older people. Are they movements and gesture quite controlled, or are they free-flowing? And how is their energy? Do they have high energy? Do they have low energy? So in that moment, you can read so much about how somebody is presenting. And when you get to know your students, because our work is very much about relationship, unless you teach at a festival or some open classes, which by definition is very hard to keep trauma-informed or trauma-sensitive, because you cannot establish so much sense of safety when you are teaching those people. Very large classes. And so when you get to know your students, you start knowing how they present. What's their normal presentation, the usual presentation? So some people maybe are a bit more anxious, other people are more relaxed. But if they turn up to your class or your one-to-one and they present in a different way, you know something else is going on in here. So really getting to know your students, observing how they are, how they use their voice, how they speak, how is their breath, how is their presence and engagement. All of those things are a way of somebody presenting themselves and expressing themselves and being in the moment, in their physiology, without going into the story of what's happening. So number one is really to understand how trauma and trauma symptoms and nervous system dysregulation shows up in somebody's physiology and presentation in this moment. Because if you know that, you can see when somebody got triggered off, because their presentation will change, often quite drastically. So number one is really to understand that, have the skills of observation where you can see on a more detailed level somebody's change in presentation and their physiology. Number two, for me, something that is really important is being mindful of the language that you use. What language do you use in your classes? And really paying attention to the language that you use. There are so many things that we say as yoga teachers, like trust your body is my favorite one, or listen to your body, or surrender to the ground. All of those things might be simply inaccessible to somebody who has experienced trauma or who is in a high level of activation, whether it's fight or flight or shutdown or freeze. It's really difficult for somebody who's experienced some kind of trauma to trust their body, because the body is not a safe place. They don't trust their body. Maybe they don't even want to listen to their body, because every time they tune into their body, it's too much, it's too overwhelming, or it's too painful. The memories might come up. And so really the language that we use needs to guide our students into going at the pace that is right for them, into trying things out, into bringing qualities like curiosity. Let's see what's possible here. Let's see how you feel within that. Using the words like, I'd like to invite you to try this pose. Let's just notice when we bring breath into this pose, how our experience changes. Let's just notice if you brought more self-compassion into how you breathing in this moment, or how you're doing this pose or this movement, how would your experience change? So our language needs to invite people again and again to approach their practice with curiosity. It needs to help our students to nurture and cultivate inner sense of safety. So for example, exploring what stability feels in the pose, describing the pose as close as you can to what you're asking them to do, giving them permission not to have to do something in the pose, and allowing them to cultivate more self-compassion, less competition, more self-acceptance, less of checking what other people are doing, more embracing and maybe having fun with practicing. Humor is a wonderful thing to use in the teaching, because you can only use humor when you are in a state of relaxation, when you feel safe enough. So the language needs to reflect how we want to our students to feel, what we want them to cultivate. And that is always starting with safety, always. Giving people permission not to do certain poses. Normalizing that everybody has got a different body. Let's say my downwards facing dog will look differently to your downwards facing dog. Yes, we all follow the cues, but it will look a bit different for each one of us, because of our ability in this moment and because of the type of the body that we have. Somebody who's very stiff in their body will do their postures very differently to somebody who's hypermobile. So really understanding that we all have different bodies, and really nurturing self-acceptance and helping our students to nurture self-acceptance through the language that we use. Let's try this. Let's see, let's be curious about it. Let's bring self-compassion. And that leads me, so number 2 is using the language in a right kind of way, from the way that is trauma-informed and gives people permission to practice in the way that is right for them. And number 3, that leads me to number 3, which is really learn about power dynamics and consent. This is something that we do all cover, or we all should cover during our yoga teacher training. But this is something, again, this is a skill. We talk about values, we talk about our awareness, and we talk about skills. And really working with our students to encourage them to have to cultivate their sense of choice, that sense of choosing what's right for them, that sense of being an expert in their own body. Yes, we are there to teach them. Yes, we are there to guide them. Yes, we are there to keep them safe. But ultimately, what we want is for somebody, for our student or our client, to learn to take care of themselves and keep themselves safe, to really nurture inner resources that they have, to really be empowered in the way that they practice and in the way that they live their life. So rather than us being an expert and then being a student that has to follow us, we need to collaborate with our students. We need to meet them where they are at and take them gently at their own pace into somewhere else, into exploring, into growing, but it has to be at their pace. In a one-to-one sessions, it's easier because you are working with just one person's needs, and there can be a lot of, checking in and how you doing and how does that feel, and you're observing just one person's presentation. In a class, you have to be mindful that everybody's body is different, and so you have to keep repeating. That goes back to the language. You have to keep repeating those things. Pay attention to what your body is saying and explain what that means. It means that, if it feels like you're running out of breath, you're working too hard. Maybe you need to back off a little bit. Stay in the pose as long as it feels right and then come to a more relaxed pose. Here are 3 different options. You could do, for example, child pose, or you could do cat-cow movement, or you could go into downwards facing dog, on the in-breath raising one leg, on the out-breath bringing the leg down, and then on the in-breath raising the other leg, on the out-breath bringing the leg down. 3 different postures with different level of intensity, allowing your students to choose which one is right for them in this moment in time. So there are various ways that we can look at how we can teach, how we can make it more accessible, how, remembering that we all have very different bodies. And even for the same person, one day they come to session with you, they might have had a holiday, they rested, they're full of beans, they're really kind of ready to go for it. On another day, they might come in and something happened. They had some bad news about their loved ones, or they might be recovering from illness. Their energy levels are completely different, and they might not be able to do what they were able to do the previous week or another week. So always meeting our students where they are at. And so these are the 3 things that kind of come up for me when I think about how we can bring, trauma-informed approach into our sessions straight away. So the first one was really study and learn how trauma and trauma symptoms present and how the nervous system dysregulation presents physiologically in somebody and how they present. Build that relationship with your students so you get to know them. You know what's the kind of, I could say baseline, but how do they present in a normal way usually? So then you know how they might, when they arrive and they present in a very different way, you know that you need to pay attention. Number 2 is use the right kind of language. Inviting people to work with you, using the language that is descriptive. Don't assume that people know what you mean. Really using psychoeducation in our classes is a wonderful way to teach our students, because yoga is promoted as so many different things. Come to yoga, feel calm. Come to yoga, great for stress management. Come to yoga, get fit. Come to yoga, have time out. Come to yoga, all of that. Yoga promises a lot. And we have to be really mindful that, yes, there is a lot of stuff that people can benefit from yoga, but we also need to make it accessible to them. People need to have points of reference. How does it feel to be calmer? How does it feel to be more relaxed? So number 2 was language. And number 3 is really being mindful, aware, and learn about consent and power dynamics in our teaching. It cannot do it without, if you're not aware of that, if you don't know that much about consent, if you don't know much about power dynamics, you need to really learn about this, because it's difficult to create a sense of safety if you are not aware of those things. So that comes under ethics. And for me, that's something that we need to continuously learn again and again and again. And this is something that, I cover quite a lot in the 80-hour trauma-informed yoga and embodied resilience training, and also in CPDs on consent, power dynamic, and trauma. So make sure that you revisit it, especially if your training's been a while ago and you've been teaching for a while. And as always, one last thought here that I always have to say is it always starts with you. From a polyvagal theory model, we know that it's not just about self-regulation, it's about co-regulation. And some experts say that it's all about co-regulation. It certainly is all about co-regulation for children, for babies, but as adults, we want to be able to learn to self-regulate as well, not just rely on co-regulation with others. But co-regulation starts with how you present and how you are and how you connect with your students and your clients. So I hope that makes sense and that you enjoyed this training. Let me know in the comments if you have got any questions, and I will be seeing you again for another training next week. Look after yourself. Take care.